Before we can start coding, we first need to install a few things. In this video, we'll be completing the installation for Mac users. If you aren't using a Mac, you don't need to watch this video. Instead, you should watch the corresponding video for non-Mac users. Installation is pretty tricky, but we'll be using a great resource called installrails.com. So I'll open my Google Chrome browser, and I'll go to www.installrails.com. Click on Start Now, and click Mac. So first we need to figure out which version of Mac OS we're using. We can do this by going to the upper left, clicking the Apple logo, and clicking About This Mac. Now you can see I'm using version 10.9. At the bottom of the page, when it asks you which version you're using, I'll be going through the walkthrough for version 10.9. So if you're using that too, you can just follow along. But if you're using a different version, you should still watch this full video because many steps will be the same, and we'll be adding some customizations of our own. After finishing the video, you can then follow the tutorial for your specific version and stop at the same point. Okay, here we go. So this page has us install something called Xcode. Now you don't need to understand everything that we're installing. For now, just think of it like equipping your computer with the right tools. So I won't go through this line by line, but I recommend that you follow along and then pause your computer, and when you're done, come back. Okay, now that Xcode is installed, let's go on to the next step. Now here, this page talks about something called the command line. The command line is accessible through an app that's installed with every new Mac computer called the terminal. But I prefer to use something different called iTerm2. You can figure out how to install it by Googling iTerm2. Click the first link and click download. Once the download is done, we can see it in our downloads folder. Unzip the file, and let's open iTerm. Click open. Okay, let's double click it one more time. And this is what it looks like. So this is what we'll be using to type in a lot of the commands that we'll use to install the files. Okay, so for now, we'll go back to our Install Rails guide. We'll scroll to the bottom, and we'll hit Next Step. Now, do the same thing with installing Homebrew as you did with installing Xcode. So pause the video, follow the steps, and when you're done, come back. Okay, now that Homebrew is installed, let's move on to the next step. Okay, now we're installing something called Git. Git is used for version control. So in other words, when you write your code, you want to keep checkpoints or save the progress that you've made. In case you've made a mistake, you can always go back and revert to an earlier checkpoint. So follow the instructions, and once you're done, let's move on to the next step. Okay, next step. Now we configure Git. So when you follow these instructions, make sure you don't copy and paste exactly what's here. Make sure that you replace your actual name with your name, and replace your actual email with your primary email. You'll see this note about this GitHub account. You don't have one yet, but that's okay. We'll set it up later on in the course. Finally, you can verify your configuration by typing this. Once you're done, let's move on to the next step. Now we'll install RVM and Ruby. So follow each step line by line, and once you're done, come back and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, next step. Now we get to install Rails. Similar process. Once you're finished, come back and we'll hit next step. Okay, next step. Now the last thing we'll do is we'll install something called a text editor. A text editor is where you write your code. There are lots of different text editors to choose from, but I like to use Sublime Text too. You can follow the instructions here to download Sublime Text. And once you're done, There's one more thing that we'll do. So pause now and come back when you're finished. Okay, now that you're done, we'll set up a little handy shortcut that we'll be using a lot throughout the course. So if you Google set up SUBL and click on the first link, you'll see this line. So copy this line, and now go and open this iTerm2 that you downloaded and paste that in. Hit enter and you're done. Okay, so in the next video we're going to be creating our first app. So you can close install Rails and close iTerm2 and close this new tab that we've opened.